Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Okay, so I think this is episode 8.
I think it is too.
It's kind of sad because we haven't done that many, and I've really lost track. Every time we sit down, I'm like, what episode is this? Let's go with 8.
That may be part of the pandemic too. I've lost track of like what day it is, what month it is.
Let's put it on the pandemic.
I think that's a great idea.
The pandemic does kind of squash your brain. It's like, what day is this?
Oh my gosh,
it's all
so
blending.
bad. But I do think this is episode 8.
Okay. And, we talk often when we talk about like what topics we want to cover or get into. And when we were having that conversation, you mentioned self-esteem. You said, I'd love to talk about self-esteem, which obviously I know what self-esteem is. And at the time I thought, okay, I wonder how you mean self-esteem. It's kind of a broad topic. So you told me you've spoken on this. Mm-hmm. Why? Like, why do you think this is an important factor? Why have you talked about this or made presentations specifically around self-esteem?
Sure. Well, it's actually my favorite thing to talk about, Greg, for a number of reasons. One is that there's a lot of confusion around it.
Among parents.
Parents, yeah.
Okay.
And, honestly, sometimes even experts, there's a lot of confusion around it. And yet it remains central to a child's capability, and maybe, we could talk about adults too, but a child's capability to be all the other things that we expect them to be. So we expect children to develop a sense of responsibility. We expect children to develop a sense of a moral code or ethical code, right? We expect children to learn to cooperate with one another, to resolve conflict peacefully. And the ability to do all of those things, and probably almost anything else that you can imagine a child doing, that it all rides on the sense of self-esteem. And I equate self-esteem and confidence.
Okay.
So, the kind of the technical definition of self-esteem is it refers to how we think about ourselves. Mm-hmm. So if we feel good about ourselves, and when self-esteem is high, we have a tendency to form healthy relationships.
Sure.
We're courageous around learning new things. Mm-hmm. We're able to take appropriate risks for appropriate goals or consequences, either one. So self-esteem becomes really important. I think some of the confusion that has occurred over time about self-esteem, well, there's a lot of different things, but I think one of the things is that people sometimes confuse self-esteem with hubris.
Okay. You mean the difference between sort of arrogance and confidence?
Correct.
Okay.
So hubris is an unwarranted confidence. In other words, it's a braggart, sure, kind of thing. I'm so cool kind of thing. But it's not warranted. There's nothing within the person that says that they have the skills or the abilities or whatever to feel confident about.
Right. There's a phrase in AA. I'm not in AA, but I've heard this and I kind of really like it, and it fits with some people I run into and deal with. And it's big ego, low self-esteem. Yeah. Meaning that the person has a ton of bravado, but underneath it's not held up by anything. They actually have low self-esteem underneath that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. That bravado, I think, actually is armor.
Right. I thought of it just because you said hubris.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that hubris is armor, against a very fragile ego.
Right.
Often.
Or an insecurity.
Right. Yeah, no question. So I think another reason that this is one of my favorite things to talk about is that the way in which historically people have tried to raise a child's sense of self-esteem has been very misguided. And has had, I would argue, almost disastrous results.
Does this have to do, because you sent me sort of this
Mhm.
document that you sometimes follow, and a document you wrote. You talked about 4 ways that you discouraged.
Yeah.
Is that the idea? Is that part of this misguided thing that parents do? I mean, you listed, which would be great. We could go through all of these if this is what you're talking about. You said there's 4 ways we discourage self-esteem in a child, as I understand it.
Mhm.
Negative expectations, perfectionists, overprotection, focus on mistakes. Now, is that what you mean, or is that a separate thing?
Well, I would love to go through that
Great.
because to me, that is, there's kind of 2 sides to the coin. What are we doing that we shouldn't be doing?
Okay.
And you just named all the things that we shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And then how can we do it better?
So when you say misguided, is that different from this list?
Well,
What are some of the
sort of.
when you say misguided?
When I say misguided, there was a period of time where people, parents and teachers and society, I guess, decided that they needed to focus more on children's self-esteem. The misguided attempt to do that was in the form of praise.
Okay.
And to kind of use a universal concept that I think parents will it will resonate with parents. Participation awards.
Okay. So what's wrong with praise as a form of building self-esteem?
So praise refers to acknowledging the result of behavior as opposed to encouragement, which is what I'd like to get further into in this episode.
Right.
Encouragement really addresses the work ethic, working hard.
So you mean the process of it?
Precisely.
Okay.
Praise is often very general.
Right.
It is often over the top.
Mm-hmm.
So it might sound like, your child brings home a scribble from school and you're like, you are Picasso. You are the best artist in the world. Oh my gosh. And, everything goes up on the refrigerator.
Right. Everything is incredible. So there's this very over-the-top proclamation, which parents might think, I really help my child because when they come home with the scribble, I tell them they're Picasso.
Exactly.
So this is going to build great self-esteem.
Exactly.
And right. So it sounds like, and why doesn't it? Because it's more about the result. It's general. It's not based on any of the process that led them there. Maybe it's not acknowledging the struggle piece of it, or
right. It doesn't acknowledge the struggle piece of it, and especially if there is no struggle. If it's just a slash on a piece of paper by a 10-year-old, and they're coming home and saying, hey, look at this, Mom, Dad, didn't I do good? So it doesn't acknowledge the work or effort that ultimately has that feeling of satisfaction for us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit like the bar cannot be too high or your self-esteem is going to be low. Because if you try and can never get over that bar,
mm-hmm.
then you give up.
You mean the bar that maybe the parent has set for the child?
Yeah, whatever it might be. I mean, I think there's always...
Or your own bar. I mean,
No,
I guess you're talking about dynamics that happen between the parent and the child, or even that the child has intuitively with themselves.
Exactly, or that the school has. I mean, there's a lot of bars that we have to try to get over in life. The schoolwork is one of them. Career is one of them. So if the bar is too high... like
societal expectations and pressure.
If you're expecting your child, or if your child's expecting to be able to hit a home run, but in reality they can't even pick up a bat because it's too heavy, that's going to lead to lower self-esteem. What's interesting to me is that if the bar is too low, the same thing happens. So if there's no effort required and the child is just stepping over the bar, right?
And there's no expectation.
But there's also no effort. So we find this often in children who are very gifted in a particular area. Let's say you've got a child, years ago I knew a child who was in 4th grade or whatever, and had to go to Stuyvesant High School, which is one of the top tier high schools. A 4th grader had to go to Stuyvesant High School for the mathematics. Mm-hmm. But that didn't necessarily guarantee high self-esteem because, it's easy. What are you talking about? This is easy. And especially in his classroom, in the 4th grade classroom, other kids were struggling and he was like, wow. So there's something in the struggle that creates the strength that really is self-esteem, that level of confidence. The other thing that we found out is when you praise a child, when you're just commenting on
The
the
result.
results. Praise is actually addictive.
Mm.
I remember being a dancer, and all of the hours that I spent in the studio at the bar and in practice and rehearsals and stuff wasn't recognized. But of course, when I got on the stage, there was applause and
Sure.
the result
Mm-hmm.
was being acknowledged.
Right.
But I remember saying to my mother after a performance, saying, "What did you think?" And she said, "Oh my gosh, you were so good." And I was like, "Was I good?" "Yes, you were awesome." So I was awesome, right? I was really good. And there's a need to keep that going because it's addictive. It actually fires.
Sure. It's like a drug.
It's like a drug,
Sure.
right? When we encourage, that is, when we acknowledge the process and the hard work, it doesn't have the same effect. You don't have to keep reaching for the external praise.
And maybe that result, that one hit of the praise.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. You instead, kids learn to internally acknowledge their own efforts. And that's ultimately what builds self-esteem. A very simple example of that is that it's better when a child says, "Look at this grade I got," or "Look at this fabulous drawing I did." It's better to say, "You must feel so proud of yourself," than to say, "I'm so proud of you."
I mean, I understand intellectually why you're saying that. What's the difference?
The difference is that "I'm so proud of you" is an external reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
"You must be proud of yourself" makes the pride an internal reinforcer for the child.
Right, because it's about them. I mean, it's you instead of I.
Exactly.
Right. So already that the parent isn't making about "I am proud of you," and then they're reaching to sort of achieve this thing from the parent.
Yes. Now, let me just pause there, Greg, and say that rigidity in terms of parenting, whenever we talk about any of these techniques, if you become too rigid about it, that's not good either. So I have had a situation with a mother years ago, maybe 20 years ago, who took it very, very literally.
In terms of how to praise or something?
Not praising, not saying she was proud of her kid.
Okay.
Right? And the kid got into high school and had some project that they had to do and did it. And it was sitting on the counter to be taken to school. It was like a physical, I don't know, diorama or whatever.
And she was worried, I don't want to overpraise him, so let me not say anything.
Well, here's what happened. She goofed, quote unquote, and said to him, "Wow, that is awesome. I am so proud of you." And he took a step back and he was like, "You are? I didn't think you ever were proud of me." Because she had said, "You must feel so proud of yourself," over and over, but she had never actually said, "I feel proud of you." So I really want to help our listeners understand it's not a 100% thing.
Right.
It goes back to the 70-30 rule.
Yeah, right. It's so funny. I was just going to say that. Like, this isn't, you say this a lot about a lot of the techniques we sort of talk about here and you bring up that it's also like a learning curve. It's not like you put this on and like, now this is how you praise and this is how you get self-esteem for your child.
Right, exactly.
It's kind of a process, and you're saying it's not a perfect process. And we talk about 70-30. If you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard this, but what is the 70-30 rule again?
You only have to get it right 70% of the time. That leaves a 30% margin for error that you want to take advantage of.
Sure.
You
and give yourself a break that you're not going to get it perfect.
Absolutely. And as you can see from the story I just told, the mother,
I will never say perfect. I am proud, and never will say, I will only say you are, and it'll be perfect. And this child, and then he's like, "Why don't you ever say you're proud of me?"
Exactly. So we don't want 100%.
And rigidity around it is what
we don't
you're
want
saying.
rigidity.
Right. But this is the general idea. Because I sort of like that. And thematically, you sort of talk about this a lot, is like when you say you, it becomes a connection between the two of you, I would think. Is that the idea? That they're part of it?
I think it has to do what we've talked about in a lot of different podcasts so far, which is that we want to make sure to acknowledge how the child feels about things, because that helps them gain insight into their own feelings. So to say, "You must feel so proud of yourself," it helps them connect to that inner sense of, "I did great," right?
Right.
So that they don't have to do what I did as a dancer growing up, which was say, did I do great, Mom? Did I do great, Mom? Did I do great? I had no internal sense of how I did. So that's the difference between praising, right, which creates that external, that need for the external reinforcement from somebody other than oneself, versus acknowledging the feeling that you see your child have, which often is pride, and it allows them to then
connect to it internally themselves.
Correct.
Well, that was what I was trying to remember, is our last episode was around being comfortable with uncomfortable feelings. And as opposed to trying to fix the uncomfortable feeling in your child, you acknowledge it. So they develop sort of an internal skill around doing that themselves. It sounds like this is the same idea. That's what I guess I mean when I say if they're part of that process. I sort of like that idea that you're saying that they can then internally connect with it as well. Like, yeah, I am proud. Yeah, I did work hard on this.
Absolutely. And, we did spend a lot of time, the whole podcast last time, talking about being able to tolerate your uncomfortable feelings. But we also need to pay attention to the child's positive feelings, the child's comfortable feelings, the happy feelings that kids have, so that they can identify those as well. Because to create a well-rounded human being, people who are well-rounded acknowledge both. They acknowledge, wow, I'm really bummed today. But they can also say, oh, I feel so good about this. Feeling good about something allows you to repeat it intentionally, right? So
because it's kind of like a learned emotional behavior?
Sure. When you feel proud of something, then you're like, well, what can I do to recreate that feeling of pride?
And feeling of self-esteem, which of course feels great.
Exactly.
Why don't we go through these so we can maybe speak specifically to some of these? And we'll do maybe the 4 ways we discourage kids to start with. So when you say negative expectations, what do you mean?
Okay. And I just want to say, before we even go through each of those, the intention of the parent in each of these cases is not bad. The intention is always, or almost always, to protect our children, to help them do better, to help them achieve, to love them up. That's the intention.
Sure. That's what you mentioned at the beginning, though, that sometimes it can be misguided.
Correct.
So when you say, what do you mean when you say negative expectations?
So negative expectations refers to the fact that often parents expect their children to do something wrong. Negative expectations is communicated primarily with the words don't and be careful. Okay. Don't forget your homework.
Right.
Don't run. Don't slip. Don't fall. Don't spill that.
Sure.
Right? And that communicates. Psychologists believe that children don't even hear the word don't. They only hear what comes after it. So if you say don't spill that, what does the child hear? Spill that.
Right. No, of course.
Because it translates to action before they can prevent themselves from doing it.
Well, and I just have to say, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about this. So my wife, I have a tendency to misplace things and lose things. And we talked about this a little bit. I've had a lifelong habit. And my wife, not that she'd get on me, but sort of like that same thing, like cautioning me around it. Like, don't lose your keys. Make sure you put them in the right place. Put your wallet. Do this. Don't do that. And I think her own therapist, when she was sort of talking about like, this is kind of driving me crazy, her therapist said, don't say anything around it, because I think that idea, like you're almost causing this in a way, because now you're constantly thinking about it. Right.
Yes.
And so she did. She consciously was like, I'm not going to be on him about like, make sure you put your keys in the right place. I'm sort of simplifying it, but and it's not that she even shared that with me, but she felt that I sort of turned it around, because of course I don't want to lose my stuff, and I think I have an artist brain, so I am kind of absent-minded, but I don't want to do that. But when I feel the pressure of like, right, I don't want to lose that. Oh, right, do that it can almost cause it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it comes from that expectation that the person has around whatever it is they expect you to do. And children and people live up to our expectation.
Yeah, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if you have it in your mind, like, yeah, I'm clumsy, I trip all the time.
Exactly.
Oh, clumsy Sally.
Absolutely.
Be careful, you know how you lose your balance all the time. Old Sally's
Exactly.
gonna lose her balance for the rest of her life.
It's absolutely
Is that the
true.
idea?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's the
okay.
idea.
Right.
And because well, and here's the story that I tell, Greg, that I feel is so powerful because it's not about kids. It's about an adult. And specifically, it's about my father-in-law, may he rest in peace. We grew up in Texas, my husband and I both did. And one of the things my father-in-law loved was keeping his lawn beautiful and his garden beds and his trees. He would get up on a 10-foot tall ladder and prune the trees, which, is potentially dangerous. I mean, because you're using these shears that really can cut through a big, hard piece of something. So he would get up and prune the trees. And he told me this story, by the way. So, this is from the horse's mouth. My mother-in-law would stand underneath the ladder and say, Dawn, be careful up there. Be careful. Don't fall. Don't hurt yourself. Don't cut your finger. And when he told me this story, he said, what did she think I was going to do? Deliberately fall off the ladder?
Right.
Put my finger in the shears? So first of all, when we hear it in the adult context, we can kind of see how ridiculous it is. But second of all, and the moral of the story is, he was probably 35 when this was, going on. And over time, he became afraid to prune the trees. And his beloved yard work, that was one of the things he had to hire out. And he told me this story. So
how do you what is the opposite of that though? Because I'm thinking of maybe a child that's going out with their friends and it's going to be late and you have some concerns as a parent, like, hey, whatever it is, like, make sure you ride with friends, make sure you call me if it's dark and I need to come pick you up. Don't drink and drive, whatever those things are. How do you get some of that across? On your list of 4 ways to encourage, you have show confidence. Is that
correct?
Is that what the opposite of this is, of negative expectations? And so how do you do that instead?
So showing confidence is a little bit like seeing the glass as half full instead of half empty. So instead of seeing the child as about to trip, you see the child as being coordinated enough to...
You got this.
You got this. I think the listener will find as we go through all of these, the positive ways to encourage instead of discourage, there's kind of an overall theme of catch them doing it right. So one of the things, when I was years ago, I was teaching this to teachers in a preschool. And there was a little 4-year-old who was sitting, I was in the teacher's lounge area and the teachers were preparing their classrooms. And it was just me and this little 4-year-old who was eating a bowl of cereal. I have no idea why she was eating a bowl of cereal, why she was doing it at school or whatever, but it was fine. So I was sitting there looking over my notes. And she finished the bowl of cereal, but it obviously was not sugary cereal, which would have left the milk in the bowl very sweet.
Sure.
No. So basically, she finished all the crunchy bits and had a bowl full of milk left over. So she picked it up and she was walking by me to the sink that was over on the other side of me. And we had not said a word up until that point, but she was carrying the bowl and she looks at me. She decides now, it's a good idea. She says, it's very important to put your bowl in the sink when you're finished. And I said, I think you're right. Well, that opened the floodgates of 4-year-old communication, right? So now she's like, talkity, 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 talkity. And she's walking with this bowl of milk. Yeah. She's talking to me and looking at me, not looking at the bowl. And the milk is starting to do that little gravity-defying thing on the edge. And I thought, I got to get this right because I'm teaching it today. I didn't want to use my 30%. So be
careful.
Exactly. Which is the tendency. It's like,
of
be
course,
careful.
That's the impulse.
And I said, I noticed how carefully you're holding that bowl. And she looked at it, she tipped it upright, and she said, yes, I am. And she walked the rest of the way and didn't spill a drop.
Right.
That's showing confidence.
Wow, that's very hard to do in the moment. That's why we keep talking about it's a learned practice, right? Because of course your instinct is, be careful, don't spill that. Don't spill it. And that's when it goes all over the floor.
Exactly.
Or, hey, be careful because you know how many times you've spilled the bowls. You're a spiller. You got to remember.
Spiller.
Right.
You know how clumsy you are.
Right.
Right.
So showing confidence.
Showing confidence.
Right.
Looking at it as half full instead of half empty. and noticing it. So you don't have to say, I'm proud of you for carrying that bowl so carefully, or you're doing a good job carrying that bowl so carefully. The best kind of encouragement is noticing.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that you're doing that.
Right.
And then that pulls their focus and attention back to noticing themselves.
Mm-hmm. And again, now you're connecting, they can connect it internally themselves.
Right.
Right. So they're having to experience it. I'm carrying this bowl. I'm incredible.
Exactly.
Okay. So another way that parents might discourage, you have perfectionists.
Yeah. So, I don't think that I probably need to even describe what that looks like.
Right.
I think a lot of people are perfectionists. I think, it's...
This is sort of maybe speaking to the expectations are too high.
Well, expecting perfection. So for example, I mean, gosh, it comes up week after week after week. It's just constant, where a parent will say, my kid brought home a report card and it was all A's, but there was a B plus in it. And so I said, what's going on with this B plus?
And that's where they begin.
That's where they begin. But even if you didn't begin that way, noticing that, pointing that out is very discouraging, because nobody can be perfect. And so if we point that out, the kid gets the impression of, well, if all you're going to notice is what I did wrong. In other words, if for you, my parent, if for you, it's not good enough unless it's all A's. And I'm just using that kind of metaphorically, because it could be with anything,
Sure.
Winning a soccer game. It could be, I mean, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
I'm just using that. If that's all that matters to you, why should I try?
Well, I could see how that could be just defeating and might lead to low self-esteem, because nothing that you can do is good enough.
Correct. It's just not good enough.
And I could see if you come home with a report card that's all A's and one B, and your parent brings up the B, or maybe they give short shrift to great job in the A's, but this B plus, let's dig into this. What's this about?
Exactly.
Right.
Why didn't you do as well there as you did in the other classes? So I think the most shocking story that illustrates this that I have come across in my decades of doing this, I had a person in one of my groups who was at home with his mom and little brother. And the mother had just finished the laundry, and it was folded and put on her bed, and the two kids were supposed to put it away. The younger brother was playing with matches, right? Not a good idea.
Okay.
But anyway, playing with matches. And there was a kind of a table runner on mom's desk that was an old antique crocheted or whatever doily type
This sounds
thing.
like all recipes for disaster. Now we have this antique runner, matches. Okay.
Bad ideas.
Okay.
So little brother sets the thing on fire accidentally.
Okay.
Sibling grabs the first thing that they can get their hands on and beats the flames out, saving
Sure.
the house. Mom comes in, sees what's going on, and direct quote, she says, "I can't believe you used your good pants."
To put out the fire?
Yes.
This is a real story?
This is a true story.
Okay.
I mean, I was flabbergasted, and I hope that is an extreme story that.
But did she relate
listeners...
this story like, can you believe they used their real pants to put out the fire? The parent was relating it in that way?
Well, so the person who was relating it was an adult who had, it was their experience as a child.
Oh, I see.
They were the one as a child who put the fire out with their good pants, and their mother came in and said, "I can't believe you used."
Because that's the other part of this, is all the reparations you might have to do around the terrible
things that you've already
parenting.
Done.
Right.
Yes. Now, I hope that example feels to our listeners as an extreme. I hope our listeners hear that and go, "Oh my gosh, I would never do that."
Yeah, but it sort of synthesizes that idea.
It does.
The perfectionist. Right.
It does. When we remark on the 10% or the 1% that went wrong, and don't talk about the 90% or 99% that went right. Statistically, the statistic that I've heard is that on average, what children do, what their behaviors are on a daily basis is 90% positive. What they hear on a daily basis is 90% negative. And that's just distressing to me, right? That we aren't giving our kids credit. It's kind of like what's gone on in the pandemic.
Right.
Our kids are superheroes.
You've talked about this a lot, and because there's been a lot of this talk about like kids falling behind and too much TV and this whole falling behind idea, and not shifting the perception of this sort of historic trauma we've gone through. And you say that a lot, like the fact that kids are surviving this, and it's sort of recalibrating your perception and what's a victory.
Exactly. I feel like we need to celebrate children's successes.
So the opposite of perfectionism is acceptance. So I guess that's the idea. That would be an example of having some acceptance. It doesn't mean that if the child's had struggles through the pandemic academically, that you say, it's fine, everything's fine. But I guess the idea is you can't have perfectionism, which is like, how could you be getting terrible grades? These are so terrible.
Right.
How do we deal with this, but also have some acceptance around the struggle? Like if we're talking about the pandemic, if we're talking about a child that's maybe struggled with their grades during the pandemic, how do we deal with this? Because maybe it is an issue, but it's also important that maybe we limit our perfectionism and have some acceptance around what's going on. Is that the idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you talk about it with that example?
Sure. Yeah. If we're talking about the pandemic, that's a great example that we need to accept that it's an acceptance of, our kids are doing the best they can, or our kids are who they are in a the very broadest sense. Greg, acceptance forms the foundation of self-esteem. When we accept our children for who they are, for not only their strengths, but also for their weaknesses, and when we celebrate their strengths and downplay their weaknesses, that sends the message to the child that they are a good person inside. There's a great book that it's a children's book, and it's called Mama, Do You Love Me? It's about a little girl who lives in Alaska, or a very cold place. And she says to her mama, Mama, do you love me? And the mama says, yes, I do, dear one. And the little girl says, well, how long will you love me? And the mama says, I will love you until the stars turn to fish in the sky. And the little girl says, well, how much do you love me? And the mama says, I love you more than the raven loves its treasure. And the little girl says, well, what if I was carrying our eggs and I tripped and I fell and they broke? Then would you love me? And the mama says, well, I would feel sorry, but still I would love you. And the little girl says, well, what if I took water and I threw it on our lamp and I put it out? Then would you love me? And the mama says, well, I would feel angry, but still I would love you. And the little girl says, well, what if I turned into a musk ox? Then would you love me? And the mama says, well, I would feel surprised, but still I would love you. And the little girl says, what if I turned into a walrus with long, shiny tusks? Then would you love me? And the mama says, well, I would feel scared, but still I would love you. And finally, the little girl says this, what if I turned into a polar bear and I was the meanest, fiercest polar bear you ever saw, and I chased you into your tent and I made you cry? Then would you love me? And the mama says, oh, I would feel very surprised and very scared. But still, I would love you because inside that polar bear, I would know that you are still you and I love you. That's acceptance. It's separating what our child does, the behavior, the big, mean, fierce polar bear, when they chase us into our rooms and we're crying with rage, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's separating what they do from who they are. That unconditional love that we felt for them from the beginning, from when we first knew them in this world. And they didn't have to do anything to please us.
Well, I like, as I'm listening, by the way, that was kind of amazing. You have that whole story. You can just do that story. I love that the mother acknowledged her own feelings first. That's what you kept saying. Like, well, I would be angry.
Sure.
Well, I would be surprised. Well, I would be disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And I would still love you.
And
right?
I would still love you.
Great. So we have a couple more. So the next one you have is on a list of 4 ways we discourage self-esteem in our child. You have overprotection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
So overprotection refers to doing things for your child that they could do for themselves. And often overprotection comes from a sense of fear.
Sure.
You know, on
which
the part,
I'm assuming sometimes can be warranted, obviously.
Correct. So what I tell parents is if you're unclear about whether you're protecting your child in a circumstance or overprotecting your child, please err on the side of overprotection. Mm-hmm. I would much rather see a child who has a little lower self-esteem but is protected against kind of the big bad world out there than a child who, you know, has had to experience some sort of dire consequence.
Sure.
A great example of that, I think, is my daughter, who has kind of given me permission to tell these stories about her and her son. So he's 1, and he's not only a walker already, he's a runner. He's, you know, he's very adept, very, you know, he excels physically. But I had a conversation with her the other day via Zoom, and they were out on their back porch, which is a patio, which is concrete. And there's some little steps. So he's in the process of learning to go up and down the steps. Mm-hmm. So overprotection in that case would be, no. Come on. I'll help you. Here's my hand. Come down the steps. Mm-hmm. Oh, here's my hand. Go up the steps. Instead of that, she does what we call stimulating independence. So she says, what's your plan? What's your plan? Now, meanwhile, grandma over here, right, watching via Zoom, I'm like, I'm gnawing on my fingernails, you know, going, mm-hmm. you know, but she's like, what's your plan? And that kind of stimulating independence and showing confidence in his capabilities, every single time he'd get right to the step, he'd stop, and you could see him thinking about it.
The wheels turning, right.
And then if he was going down the steps, you know, it would be he had one plan. If he was coming up the steps, he had another plan. And he did it every single time, you know, except for the one time he face planted. But that was fine. It wasn't on concrete.
Right. Well, which is also part of it, too. And then we talked about this in the last podcast. That's how you develop resiliency and grit.
Yes.
Is when you work through those things. And it sort of stands to reason. It's sort of like in the last episode when you talked about fixing. If a parent is stepping in and fixing a negative, uncomfortable feeling for a child, that they never develop the skills to do that. I would think if a parent is overprotective, that leads to low self-esteem too, because you feel like you can't work through any of these things on your own.
Right.
The child feels that they can't, right?
That is absolutely on point. You know, and you can look at it in all kinds of cases. So if you look at toddlers, most preschool kids, you know, who are 2-3 years old, have their parents convinced that they cannot possibly put a coat on themselves. Mm-hmm. But the first time that you go to that toddler classroom and it's coat weather and all of the coats are lined up upside down and the child has learned from the preschool to put their hands in and flip it over their head and then the coat's on. They know how to do it, but it's, you know, easier to convince your parents to do it for you.
Sure.
But it's overprotection when parents do it for them. If you fast forward, it's things like the child comes home from school and has had a disagreement with the teacher, and the child says, you have to call the teacher, you have to say blah, 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 and the parent does it. Overprotection. Mm-hmm. It's so critical that we allow our children to do the things that they are developmentally capable of doing when they're developmentally capable. Feeding themselves, sleeping through the night, putting themselves to sleep, doing their homework,
Organizing themselves, their schedule.
organizing their schedule. It's so critical that we as parents take that step back and I'm not going to overprotect you. I'm not going to fix this for you. This is something you can do.
Right. And you're there to help and support
Sure.
if needed, obviously.
Sure,
But the
yeah.
idea is to, you write on the 4 ways we encourage is to stimulate independence
Yes,
is the opposite of overprotection.
exactly. Yeah, stimulating independence, saying, what can you do about this? What's your plan? I mean, what a great phrase,
Right.
even for a 1-year-old, for a 14-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
What's your plan?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to fix this? And look, when they're 14, they're going to go, I don't know. You're supposed to know. They're going to back talk you and you say, you know what? I bet you can figure this out.
Right.
This is something you can do.
Or you offer in terms of, it's not maybe a fix it if the child is lost, to say, you could maybe, what do you think about this?
Yes, exactly.
So then they can take it on their own and go, well, yeah, that's a possibility. And then obviously that just makes sense. Then you're building self-esteem because if, you're allowing the child to sort of figure it out and get through it and you can do this and what's your plan, and then they do it themselves, of course, like you're building a reservoir of experiences over your childhood that you've shown yourself that I can do it.
Yeah. And that becomes part of their internal resources. So the next thing that comes up, whatever the next thing is, they can draw upon their internal resources instead of reaching out for help to somebody else.
Well, that's what I think that was maybe my favorite part about when we did the episode about focusing on our uncomfortable feelings, helping the child learn to cope with them, is that you build this reservoir of experiences. So if you do that through your childhood and you run into some issues as an adult, that you have this whole filing system in your brain and your heart of like all the times that you did it that you've just
Yes.
built on through your life. And it sounds like that's the same thing with the STEAM, right? Is that you've now
Yes.
built it and shown yourself that you can.
Absolutely. We need to have those internal reservoirs as opposed to, trying to reach out and get the reinforcement from external sources.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens if there's no external source to reach out to?
Well, and eventually there won't be, right? When you go out and you're on your own. And
Yeah.
I mean, there might be in work and relationships and stuff, but then those can be sort of destructive.
Correct.
If you've not built up the tools that you need to have healthy self-esteem.
Exactly.
So this last one, I guess maybe we covered a little bit when you talked about perfectionism as an acceptance, but the last one you have in terms of 4 ways that we discourage self-esteem is we focus on mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any anecdote? Because I would imagine this is similar maybe to the grades and this idea that, and I've heard this in our parenting group sometimes, that a parent will come in with a very long story about something that happened with their child, and there will be like a mistake within the story, but
Right.
sometimes, well, and I only say this because you pointed it out and you kind of gently point this out to the parent, is that they will overlook the 95% of it that went great and be like, can you believe they did this? And I've heard you go, yeah, that's not great, but what about all of this? And it sounds like obviously this is sort of seems pretty obvious, but that if you focus on that one screw up and you focus on those screw ups with the child, that's going to lower self-esteem. It's like the bringing home the 7 A's and the 1 B, and you're like, a B?
Exactly. And, I mean, focusing on mistakes and perfectionism are so close, right? The only way that I really differentiate them, and it's a very minor way, is that when you use the word but. So let's say you ask your kid to pick up their room, right? And they do. I mean, kind of. Not really so much, but, there's a little bit done maybe. And you come into the room and you say, well, I can see that you did, you picked up that pencil, but what about what about these other things?
Well, that even sounds better than just coming in and going, this is a mess. This is not a job. You didn't do this. I asked you to clean up. And the kid's like, I did clean up. No, you didn't. This look at this is ridiculous.
Right. And
so that's even worse. So at least
right. That's kind of what I think of as perfectionism.
Right.
It's
okay.
just
Okay.
like
So
you don't notice anything
because
at all.
that's perfectionism. That's great. So perfectionism is the idea that you don't notice anything, and then what you're just saying is you come in and you say, "Hey, I see you got your notepads, but
exactly
you didn't do A, B, C. Look at your bed. What about your shelves?"
Exactly.
And so you've said in the past that the but, even if you give a nice little compliment at the top, once you say but, it's gone.
It negates everything that came before it. So it could also be, sweetheart, I love you so much, but could you be quieter because I really have a headache?
But you're actually really annoying me right now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because it's like, oh, she loves me. Oh, I'm annoying.
Right. And what they retain from that is I'm annoying.
Sure.
So what I tell parents to do to combat that is either disconnect the statements. If you have to mention what they did wrong, disconnect that from what they did right. So you can disconnect it in time. So you come into their room and you say, hey, looks like you got a good start here. And then you can go away. Right? And that implies that you have the confidence that they're going to do it. You can come back, and the disconnect in time would be, I see you have a couple more things to pick up, right? That's a disconnect between the compliment, if you want to look at it that way, and the negative.
The encouragement, maybe, yeah.
You can also, in most cases, you can substitute the word and for the word but. So you can come in and say, hey, looks like you got a good start, and I'm sure it will take you no time to finish up, right? So now it's
a connected thought now.
Right. And so I'm not ignoring what they haven't done, and I'm not being a perfectionist because I'm showing confidence in that second piece of the statement, and I'm sure you get the rest done in no time. So it winds up being a win-win in that case. We've talked about in previous, because a lot of what parents will say to me is, well, what if they did nothing? I mean, what if there's no 1% to hang your hat on? We've talked in a previous episode about the use of I messages. So in any of these cases, Greg, that we have talked about where the behavior isn't what we want, and there's there's not even a percentage that's
that you can
going
hold on to that's positive or something you can encourage.
Exactly. What you want to do is to use an iMessage.
Right. And you've said before, and I think it bears repeating, and it seems like it could be in this situation, and I would imagine would build self-esteem, is that you've said is when you do a you message, it's just negative, right?
Yes.
You are this, you are that, you need to clean up, as opposed to focusing on your own feelings, which you've said many times. So I feel really frustrated that we've talked about your room several times and you haven't even done a piece of it yet. I feel really, really frustrated by that. Is that the idea?
Yes, exactly.
And I would like you to. So we're back to that.
Yes, exactly.
I feel I would like you to because.
I feel because I would like
Thank
you to. Yeah. So when you agree to clean up your room and you don't, I feel frustrated because it's going to delay us being able to do something together as a family. I would like for you to clean up your room when you say you're going to. And, it's just boundary setting at that point. When you intentionally knock over a glass of milk, I feel annoyed because it's a big mess. I would like for you to clean it up. So it could be any of these circumstances. The one that I would steer parents away from is the grades. In other words, if the child's doing well at all in any subject, I think they're going to be more effective in terms of getting their child to pick the other grades up if they talk about the successes.
Well, that's what you have as the opposite of focus on mistakes. You say build on strengths.
Exactly.
And it doesn't mean you can't visit that, if they got the D, but your point is that focus on, certainly if you're going to start in on a discussion of, let's just say grades, because we're talking about grades, is that the idea? Like, let me focus on build on strengths, you say, which I would imagine obviously is going to improve self-esteem. Wow, you did great in English. How's that going for you? Again, it's like you talk often about curiosity. Tell me more. Wow, this looks like you brought the English grade up. That's great. How did that go?
Yes, that's exactly right. And I have real life stories about people who bit the bullet and did that. It's not easy to do.
What isn't easy to do?
It's not easy to only acknowledge the strengths and not look at that D,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not even talking about a B as in
Mm-hmm.
boy, I'm talking about a D as in dog. It's very hard to not look at that. What I have consistently seen over time is that when parents, number one, ask a child to self-evaluate on the
Right,
grades.
right. I was just thinking as you were talking, the other thing that might happen is if you don't focus on it, because the child's probably thinking, oh my God, the D, I'm going to get
Sure.
killed. And if you maybe talk about all the other stuff, I would think the child might even on their own go, yeah, but this D.
They do.
Sure.
They do. Again, I've seen it for 3 decades now. And I've seen kids at the bottom of the barrel, really, with, all failing grades and a C in gym, and this one dad, and this was like 25 years ago, but this one dad had been berating the kid about all the things, and they're like, all the bad grades, bad grades, and was kind of at his wit's end. And I said, well, I think you should try something different because
It's not working.
yeah, how's that working for you?
How's the berating going?
Exactly. Grades shooting up to the sky? Grades.
No.
So I gently suggested that he should focus on the C as being a positive.
Mm-hmm.
And that he was like, are you kidding? It's gym. Come on. And I said, well, literally, what do you have to lose at this point? So he did. The dad just focused on that C. And, the kid, being a grumpy teenager at the time, was like, no, grunt, and didn't acknowledge. But what happened over the period of a couple semesters was the C went up to an A in gym. The D's and F's went up to C's and B's in the other subjects. Was the kid the strongest in math? No. Was he destined to be an engineer? No. Did that matter? No. So this kid went on to be a high school basketball coach.
Wow.
And was very successful. What a great career, because dad was able to pull up, help him, support him in his confidence.
Right, right.
So that he could go to college and get a degree in sports.
And the thing that made sense for him.
Right.
And that he would have the self-esteem to be able to do that. I mean, one of the things that occurred to me that as you were talking is, and we sort of kind of covered this, but that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
You got to fix these terrible grades. Why are you getting such bad grades? Becomes, I get bad grades. I get bad grades.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah. And kids are like, well, I can't help it. Because the other thing that happens, Greg, is when a parent says, why aren't you getting better grades? It's asking a question that the child doesn't know the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I try to reinforce with parents is this idea that I believe is fact, that kids do well. All kids do well if they can. If they're not doing well, it's because something's standing in their way.
Mm-hmm.
So what could that be? It could be parental discouragement. It could be, low self-esteem. Parents aren't the only component of
Yeah. There can be things at
self-esteem.
school, socially.
Exactly.
A number of things that can be contributing to low self-esteem.
Exactly. So it could be parental discouragement. It could be low self-esteem. It could be a learning disability, a hidden learning disability that hasn't been recognized. It could be as simple as, they can't see the board. So they can kind of see, but they can't see. Something is standing in the way. And when we recognize kids as being capable and wanting to do well, think about it. I don't think there's a human being on the planet who wakes up in the morning and says, wow, I think my goal today is to fail. Right? I mean, sometimes I do fail, in a day with one thing or another, but I don't wake up thinking that's my goal. Kids don't wake up thinking, oh, I'm going to do poorly today at school, unless there's something stopping them.
So the journey of that is sort of like the curiosity. It's about kind of trying to help them discover, because what you're saying is they might not know.
Right.
Right. And so the process of that is helping them figure out the roadblocks that are in the way. So if you had to sort of synthesize it into one thing for parents to remember around self-esteem, if you can, what would you say? Like, if we want to give one parting thought around it, what's most important to keep in mind?
The most important thing is to love your child unconditionally and accept them for who they are. It is the foundation of absolutely everything else in terms of self-esteem.
Well, it's interesting because in this thing that you gave me to read that you had put together, encouragement and self-esteem, you said at the top you wrote cour, C-O-U-R, comes from the French word meaning heart.
Yes.
So that's the idea?
Yes. So to encourage means to speak to your child's heart, because the lessons that they learn with the heart outlast the lessons that they learn with their mind. And if a child has heart and feels good about who they are, they can accomplish anything that they set their mind to. Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.